Hey, welcome to another one of my videos. I'm at Estonia's biggest museum. This used to be an old Soviet base. So you can imagine the Soviets sort of walking around here doing their military thing. This is an old military base, probably practicing with their guns and things. This amazing bit of architecture is in Tartu, Estonia, in southern Estonia. It's a bit of a grey day. It's cold. It's about -1. So it's a perfect day to go visit the museum, I thought. So let's go check out Estonia's biggest museum. Well, I have to say, automatically I'm impressed with just the sort of amazing build of the museum. This is a phenomenally well-designed, beautiful museum. Let's see what they have. So check this out. This is something I've never seen before. I got my ticket, got my guidebook. But look, you notice that everything's in Estonian. Not so, because I've got this. It just changes to English. Do the same here. Once again, thanks for joining me on this tour. If you haven't clicked subscribe already, do click subscribe. Hopefully you get to the end of this video. I would love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a comment below. It is massively appreciated. I'm not being sponsored by the museum. This is simply my exploration of the museum. And maybe it incentivizes you to visit Estonia and possibly this museum. What this is the Baltic Chain from 1989, and it just sort of illustrates and sort of remembers the Baltic Chain that sort of went all the way through Estonia into Riga in Latvia, and then heading into Lithuania to Vilnius. And basically in 1989 it was a commemoration of the fall of the Soviet Union. It was a fall of the oppression. It was a fall of the thankfulness that they no longer are being ruled by communism, and people were grateful. It was a significant event in history. I think it's in the Guinness Book of Records as the longest human chain, because that's a significant distance, all the way from Tallinn, all the way to Vilnius. And if you'll see some of my videos, that's a route I've travelled there on buses and trains, and that's a long route to link arm in arm, pretty much the entire way. But it proves how much the people really grateful to be rid of communism. It's strange that the West is trying to embrace this. Kids at play. Estonia is still actually a very safe society. It's the homogenization of the fact that Estonians have an actual identity. They haven't been overrun by the globalists, and kids still feel fairly safe playing in the streets, as they should do. You can't really say that's true of kids living in London. What you find with a lot of these exhibitions, and we're passing through the ages of Estonian history. It started with some interesting things like the first Estonian satellite, underwater submarine. Estonia was the first country to have e-citizenship, e-identity, so it means you carry a card of your citizenship. Very clever. The UK has yet to adopt this. Basically means the police could tell if you're a citizen or not. Crucial in my mind. All these little interactive exhibitions, although this is the first one that doesn't seem to be wanting to work, but everything's immaculate, and you can tell it's not very busy. There's a couple of people here, but I think it's also because it's so big, so even if there's a lot of people here, they disappear very quickly, so you feel like there's plenty of space. The original Estonian National Museum was actually founded in 1909 in Tartu. The museum was devoted to a folklorist, a guy called Jacob Hertz, who devoted his life to ethnography and folk art, some of which we will witness today. As I probably should have stated earlier, this impressive museum tracks the history, life and traditions of Estonian people. It presents the culture and history of the Finno-Ugric peoples and also the minorities in Estonia. As we walk through this museum, we'll see a comprehensive display of traditional Estonian national costumes from all regions. The exhibitions, which I won't go into too much detail about, include handicrafts and hand-woven carpets and linen tablecloths and cultural history of Estonia, as you will see. Before this massive museum came to exist, a manor was actually on this land, but it was destroyed during the World War II offensive. The Soviets then occupied this strip of land and built a secret Soviet bomber base. Obviously, when that was there was no room for the museum that was there before. And what's interesting is this illustrates the people of Estonia before the Russification of Estonia, because you've got to realize 1940, when the Russians basically came into Estonia and took advantage of the Nazis decimating Europe, the Russification from 1940 onwards was intense. People were sent off to the gulags, people were deported, people were executed, and an entire people were made to vanish. I mean, they still exist. Estonia is a mixed country in the fact that it's still native Estonians, and there's a lot of people of Soviet origin that basically came here. They were workers with the Soviet Union, they were families connected to the workers of the Soviet Union. Now the majority of people in certain places speak Russian. Although that's changing. It's a rather strange mechanism to show how to pronounce the letters of the Estonian language.
Wood. Wood.
Weird.
Wood.
Weird.
So this is phenomenal because it's basically celebrating the different dialects in Estonia. And we just click on one. And then you see that obviously they all sound slightly different. Just like Manchester sounds different to Liverpool. But phenomenal exhibition. I'm not sure how well you can see me right now, but this is a display where I've had to kind of crawl in, and it sort of shows me how the Estonians used to live. The Estonians very closely connected to those Inuits that you find in North America, because they made the same journey. They lived in the north, very connected to the people that lived just off the land and off the sea. You know, they would smoke their fish, and they would fish in their boats and their kayaks. And these are people that really don't exist anymore. I'm gonna bend down to get into these things, but it's Tartu is apparently the gardening capital of Estonia, at least. So just in another one of these little bunkers, you've really got to crawl down to get into them. These places are great for kids, but I think it's just basically get you moving around, because also to illustrate the fact that Tartu used to be a place that foreigners couldn't stay at overnight because of this military base where this museum used to be. Residents were, during the times of the Soviet occupation, were exposed to bombing practices, machine gun fire on the firing ranges, planes coming into land constantly. I think it must have been tough because non-residents couldn't come to visit the residents in Tartu. Well, certainly if you're a foreigner, so I couldn't suddenly rock up and do what I'm doing right now. There would not be a place for me to stay. I am enjoying these little cards, just the fact that I get to... I get to see what's, just by swiping, it's a fun museum.
You could say during the Soviet occupation, Tartu's culture was hidden from the world and from its citizens. Artifacts had to be stored in churches and spare space around the city while the airbase was functional. An airbase that was once a symbol of oppression to the city now brings enlightenment to the world and the city.
See, this is impressive. You see these old fragments of clay pots that you would often see. Sometimes I'm sure you've probably stumbled across these in the back of your garden. Obviously not Estonian if you're not in Estonia. But I know that growing up as a kid, I'd often find fragments of pots, possibly Roman, possibly, Anglo-Saxon, Norman, you name it. But the thing is, they've used the fiberglass to illustrate the shape of what these pots should have been. Because otherwise, to most people, they're fairly meaningless. But because they've done this, it gives us an idea of what these pots look like. I quite like that.
I don't often come away from museums thinking, wow, that was something different. But with this one, I certainly did. And it has to be said, the architects, the designers, the curators in this museum have done an exceptional job for the Estonian people, highlighting who the Estonian people are, highlighting the significance of their culture, highlighting how each culture is unique, but at the same time each culture really needs to be remembered and savoured for what it is. And I think the Estonian people who have been involved in this museum certainly have done that. By walking around, there's a sense of proudness and there's a sense of identity. And as an outsider, I'm left very impressed.
I mean, this is a phenomenally big museum. I mean, they weren't joking when they were saying it's Estonia's biggest museum, but this is an immense museum. There's so many little areas. All right, any guesses what this is? It's a spear. It's got spikes on the end. It's got spikes all the way up here. Each one is slightly unique, and apparently every farm in Estonia used to have one up until about the 19th century. It caused the mass wipeout of a population. These are wolf spears. Up until the 19th century, people would go hunting with these spears to take out wolves, because obviously wolves would cause a nuisance to the land, to the people. Dangerous animals, but at the same time beautiful animals, but at the same time sad that Europe had almost practically wiped them out.
Sadly, there's only about 200 wolves left in Estonia, and they've divided up between 20 wolf packs spread evenly across the Estonian landscape. So not much of a need for those Estonian spears and individual farms anymore. However, on a more positive note, let's reflect on this incredible building. As stated, it used to be a Soviet airbase and it used to be a symbol of oppression, but as you can see from these images, it is a magnificent feat of architecture. I have to say, I don't have an architect background. However, through my travels and through my life experiences, I can appreciate the beauty of amazing feats of architecture, and there's no denying that something like this is worthy of the architectural awards that it has earned over the years. The Estonian people responsible for this have to be incredibly proud of turning a former bunker/runway into this asset for the country and the world.
So, This is the back of the museum, and you can pretty much imagine the old Soviet planes would come out here. The tanks would probably come out. The soldiers would sort of file out of here, and the firing ranges would be that way. Also, the runway would be that way. But now this relic that has been, instead of being left to sort of disrepair and turned into a sort of a place where, covered in graffiti, it's been turned into this amazing museum where there's the history of the Estonian people. Every little angle celebrating the Estonian people. It's very impressive. Good way to get about. I thought I was going to have to sort of run out of the museum because I was starting to get a little bit sort of fatigued. But I managed to find myself some amazing food. I've got some breaded fish, I've got some lasagna, I've got some buckwheat, I've got potatoes. This is nice. Good coffee. Got the whole restaurant to myself. Got the view of the old airfield, but it's quite phenomenal, really. See, that's the key to any museum visit. Make sure that your stomach's full. I came with a full stomach, but now I'm full again. I'm ready for round 2. And this place is immense. So let's go.
This part of the museum is the Estonian Art Collection of Estonian art. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I have to admit I breezed around this part of the museum because I'd realised I'd been here almost 3.5 hours, and I knew the museum was going to be closing soon, and I still had more of the museum to see. And I think that really highlights just how big this museum is. If you do manage to get the privilege to visit the Estonian National Museum, I urge you to make a day of it. Obviously use the restaurant that you just saw me eating from. Just try to take in as much as possible. I'm not so familiar with Estonian art, but if you have a favourite, do leave a comment below and telling me about who your favourite is. I'd love to know any information. I'm like a sponge. Love hearing insight into your country, into all countries.
I think that might be a distant relative of Greta Thunberg. It's not really, but it might be.
How dare you!
Seeing Greta there just reminded me of the fact that her and many environmental organisations and individuals have been in the headlines over the last year. I am not an environmental activist, but I do support the efforts they make. I might not agree with all of what they do. And that brings me on to the point, at the moment, I'm making this video while under lockdown. I'm hoping that some of you will be watching this video once lockdown is finished, and I'm hoping some of you will be watching this video because we are still under lockdown. But the strange thing is, environmentalists like Greta haven't made any comment on China and China's exploitation of animals, and I find that frustratingly strange because it is not right when a culture looks at a zoo and sees that as lunch. That is massively unacceptable. Greta and the environmental movement need to speak out about it.
I mean, it gives you a sense of idea of just how... Well, it gives you a sense of idea of how empty this place is. I could shout pretty loud and there might be an echo, but I won't, because there are still security working here.
I don't know about you, but it's certainly true for me. When I'm wandering around museums and art galleries like this, I find myself reflecting on the day's events and the year's events and pondering what has happened, what may happen. And in moments like this, where I'm currently under lockdown because of this coronavirus that's sweeping the planet, as I ponder the coronavirus and I realize that people are not traveling, I found that views of my videos have basically fallen off a cliff. It's given me insight into the fact that people use my content for ideas on where to travel rather than as escapism. Because if it was escapism, people would be watching this under lockdown. It's clear that you're not. However, I'm very grateful to those loyal subscribers who continue to engage in the comments. You definitely know who you are because I continue to respond to your comments. And in times like this where everyone is feeling quite isolated, I have to admit it is wonderful when you do send me a message.
So it would seem downstairs in the basement. There's carriages, there's prams. I don't know who got down there. I'm going to go investigate.
Every 20 meters you travel in this museum, I'm pretty sure the National Geographic could make an entire episode, if not series, about. There is that much to look at. Obviously, some of the minor details probably won't fascinate some of the younger people. Some of the relics on display truly are a wonderful insight into Estonian culture, and I'm only really giving you a sort of brief look at it. So if there's anything that tickles your fancy and you're wondering what that was or what that might be, leave a comment below. I might know, because I did do a lot of reading while I was there, but I also know that a lot of viewers will be able to answer the question. I'm hoping one of the experts of the museum might even get involved and answer any of the questions in terms of what that was or what that means to the Estonian people. Still to come in this video, I head downstairs where I explore the ancient culture that used to live on the land in Estonia. So do stick with this. I can't promise a reward at the end of the video, but the very fact that you're sticking with it is rewarding in itself. So I do appreciate that.
Save.
Wow, so there's an entire exhibition downstairs, and I've only covered the ground floor, and I'm yet to cover the basement, and I've spent 3 hours on the ground floor. So let's go. This is a very impressive exhibition documenting the Ural people living in sort of Finland and Estonia, but they've been documented for hundreds and hundreds of years. The ancient Romans had documented them as people that were fairly, this is described by the ancient Romans, fairly savage, and they sort of would hunt down what they could get, and that was it. 15th century historian said that they, get this, when they received visitors, they would slaughter their children, not the visitors' children, their own children, and serve them up as dinner. And if the guest died while there, they would use him for food. I mean, harsh conditions, you're living right up in the north in cold winters, so I guess it makes sense, but I'm not suggesting they do that anymore. The few that do it still exist up there. Low ceilings. I mean, this is obviously we've come a long way since the days when the Romans were documenting the Ural people. Also got window frames and everything, but there's all this interaction in these places. It's quite amazing. Amazing. Estonians really love their technology. You'll see that in my Estonian video and on Tartu, which I made a long time ago, where they really encourage their children to get involved in the technology. And it shows in the museums. Very interactive. Gone are the times when it was just a display with a little bit of writing. Yeah, these are the people that came before the Russians. You can see just how interactive the place is, just how really vividly painting the picture of what life was like. I mean, these displays here, I can just get involved. It's all the interaction. Although where's the English? Oh, there's the English. Wedding games. So, yeah, not bad. Anyway, I do keep stopping recording, so it allows me to read the information, but gives you an idea of what this museum's like. Low ceilings. You get the impression like every display had a duck on. These people weren't tall people. I think that you can account for the fact that the poor diet probably contributed to that fact. I think around this corner is a rare sighting of more people. I mean, you can see how interactive but also how empty this place is. You know, you come here at the weekend, it's going to be busy, I'm sure. Really interesting displays showing how they lived, showing in the cabinets, which I'm not going to show because they're very dark. It shows the tools they were using, shows the clothes they were wearing, shows how they used to hunt, it showed how they're I'm going a little bit dark now, I appreciate that. It shows how when the baby was born, they used to cut the umbilical cord with an axe and then place the umbilical cord on the axe because the axe was thought to have magic powers and spiritual powers. Plus, they also wanted the men to grow up to be fine hunters because without the ability to hunt, and here's a man's knife. Without the ability to hunt, they would starve because it's harsh conditions in the peak of winter. A lot of binge eating in the winter, fatten themselves up. Well, to fatten themselves up for the winter. And then summer is when they did most of the hunting. Winter, take it easy. Sad thing is I'm having to rush around this last bit of exhibit because this place is closing in 10 minutes. I've been here about 4 hours and really shows that you need more time in this place. Some people suggest 2 to 3 hours and I disagree. You need at least 4 hours. Amazing display cabinets. Just fine. I mean, can you imagine the Brits celebrating the people that used to live there before the Romans came, or celebrating the fact that the Anglo-Saxons were there, celebrating the Normans. We don't really celebrate this, but the Estonians are celebrating that, and it's immensely important to remember the cultures that came before. So as I leave the museum, I think they're about to start filming a television show here, probably the Estonian version of a Friday night show, because it is Friday night right now. Very impressive museum. It's certainly one of the best museums I've been to in a long time. As you know, if you keep track of this channel, I hope you do. And I appreciate the fact you've been watching to the end. I'm simply very amateur at this, but I really do appreciate the fact you've been watching to the end. If you're ever in Estonia, certainly in Tartu, and you can see how easy it is to get from Tallinn to Tartu from my video that I showed you, I highly recommend the Estonian National Museum. The Estonians have got a lot to be proud of, and it's amazing that they're sort of celebrating their culture as opposed to the United Kingdom and the USA and Canada. They're trying to suppress the culture that came before them and just sort of replace it with something that's new and isn't real culture. This is a celebration of Estonian culture and how it's changed over the ages, but at the same time celebrating what was here before without anyone feeling shamed. Something to be proud of, and I highly recommend the museum. There's a house over there. It's actually an exhibition, but it's closed now. I've spent too long in that museum. But the house is upside down. I appreciate this camera probably doesn't show that. I want to do is splice a little picture there. But it's an upside down house. Now, I got to try and work my way back. Try and find a taxi or a bus. There's not much around here, so bear that in mind. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.